Florida Senator Marco Rubio. Senator, good to see you. Thank you so much for coming on National Report. We do appreciate that. This has really been a controversial issue, really, for many Americans watching this unfold in Congress. I do want to start with a tweet that you sent moments after the Senate released the text for that bipartisan gun legislation. You write this: "We are being asked to vote tonight to begin debate on a gun proposal whose legislative text was only made available less than an hour ago." Talk to me about that, as I believe the bill is 80 pages. Was there enough time to read through that?
Well, no. I mean, it was publicly released at 6:23 p.m. We only got it a few minutes before that. And then the vote was at 7:36. So an hour and 15 minutes later, it's supposed to go over 80 pages on an issue that implicates the Second Amendment rights, a constitutional right of Americans. So I think it deserves a little bit more reading. I mean, it may turn out to be the greatest bill in the world. It may turn out to be the worst. I don't know how you can deduce that unless you were involved in negotiating it on an hour and 15 minutes. At 6:30 p.m. in the afternoon, most people just flew into town, et cetera. Look, I have one fundamental concern. We have a red flag law in Florida passed by a Republican state legislature. It's a responsible law. It says only law enforcement can pursue it. You get hearings. There's all kinds of due process. They're not permanent. And it's designed primarily, the way it's primarily worked is two things. It's prevented people from killing themselves. Someone's suicidal, their family is desperate to prevent that from happening. And if somebody's out there saying, look, we're going to shoot up a school and kill a bunch of people, it allows you to take steps in that regard as well. What I'm concerned about is the way laws in other states are written. Red flag laws, for example, in states where your coworker can take you to court and try to take away your gun. So you can almost envision a scenario where the due process provisions are not strong enough. Then you could have your coworkers taking you to court, harassing gun owners, finding, shopping for the right judge who's anti-gun to begin with, and suddenly we have an abuse of this and big problem. Now, states have the right to pass those laws already. I'm just not sure that the federal government should. In fact, I'm sure the federal government should not be funding those kinds of laws or incentivizing those kinds of laws without due process in state after state. So, look, I'll look through this very carefully today. We started last night. I'll have some questions I need answered, and we'll see how this plays out, but obviously we're always going to move very cautiously because the Second Amendment rights of Americans is not an option. It is a constitutional right.
The NRA actually spoke out about this. I know Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell endorsed this bill. Obviously, it has enough Republican votes, at least so far, it appears, as McConnell's statement is here, essentially again supporting the bill. But I want to move to the National Rifle Association, what they said coming out against this bill. They released this statement that reads, quote, "In part, the NRA will support legislation that improves school security, promotes mental health services, and helps reduce violent crime. However, we will oppose this gun control legislation because it falls short at every level. It does little to truly address violent crime while opening the door to unnecessary burdens on the exercise of Second Amendment freedom by law-abiding gun owners." End quote on that one. And I'll butt that with this poll if I can, Senator. I'll show you this. In terms of these red flag gun laws, which you have spoken about, that was developed in Florida after the Parkland shooting here. Many were asked, the Convention of States Action, Trafalgar Group put this together. They said, do red flag gun control laws have the potential to be abused by government officials to disarm their political opponents and or citizens? The plurality there say yes. A majority say yes or not sure. Your thoughts on that? And it seems as if the NRA, that's the sticking point for them as well, the red flag laws. Can you elaborate?
Well, that's why due process is so important, and there has to be a very high standard. Look, the goal here, two things I would say. The first is I'm not surprised by polls like that and things I hear from people because the federal government in particular has become the enforcer of woke ideology in America. I mean, school districts are going to lose their lunch money if they don't follow their transgender agenda. Police departments are going to lose their money. You've seen the military be turned into a place where woke ideology is now promoted both publicly and in the academies. So people are looking at it and saying, all right, the government has now been deputized into the role of an enforcer for this leftist ideology. And so people are increasingly suspicious and doubtful of, and quite frankly, in many cases, alienated from government and from institutions they once trusted. As far as these laws are concerned, look, here's the goal, right? The goal is, the only way to stop these things is to identify dangerous people and stop them before they act. And if they do act, to not make schools an easy place to just walk in and massacre people. Obviously, we've learned in the last 24 hours that in Texas, they were in position to prevent this and stop this from happening. Police chose not to act. In New York, they do have a red flag law, and that didn't stop that lunatic from killing people over there. So ultimately, the challenge with gun laws is criminals will continue to violate because they're criminals, and that's what criminals do. Only law-abiding people are infringed by them. So the goal here is to protect us from dangerous criminals without infringing on the constitutional rights of law-abiding Americans. It's a very difficult balancing act to get right. So we'll always look very carefully at this red flag law. I do think some red flag law can work if they have the right due process, but they have to be very clearly written. And if they're not, then that's something I won't be able to support.
So if this red flag laws, if this is written clearly in the legislation, then you are for it, but there has to be appropriate verbiage. Is that correct?
Yeah, it has to look like the Florida law does, which so far has not been abused. And the reason why is because only the police department can bring it. It has to, meaning you can't just have your neighbor or a disgruntled spouse or ex-boyfriend or girlfriend bring these claims to a court. Right. There's clear evidentiary standards, very strict, and there's real penalties for filing false claims. And states have the right to pass those red flag laws now. What we're talking about here is incentivizing states to do this. And my view of it is we shouldn't be spending federal money to have states pass red flag laws that violate due process and the constitutional rights of Americans. I do think properly written, they can be effective. We had a proposal. We filed it over 4 years ago. It's bipartisan. It's modeled after the Florida law. I wish they would have followed that outline. We'll have to look carefully at their outline now, but we're going to put it through a lot of scrutiny because I'm very suspect about whether, in fact, the due process provisions here meet the standards we set a long time ago.
All right, we'll continue to watch that. Before I let you go, if I can ask you about this, President Biden will be delivering remarks today on gas prices, 2 p.m. Eastern time. He's expected, as you know, to call for a temporary federal gas tax suspension. That'll last for about 3 months. It should save those at the pump of around 18 cents per gallon of gasoline, 24 cents per gallon of diesel. Senator, final thoughts on that effort by this administration?
Well, every week they roll out a new gimmick. So at one point it was Putin's fault, and then they rolled out the argument that the corporations were making too much money. The next week is that the corporations were holding back on refining, and now it's this gimmick. The bottom line is none of these gimmicks will solve this problem. There is only one way to lower the cost of gasoline, and that is produce more of it. And we are blessed to live in a country that has the ability to do it. But we're not doing it, and we're not going to do it because this administration is hostile to that industry. They've told them we're going to put you out of business in 10 years, but they expect them to somehow ramp up production in the short term. They have made it impossible to drill, impossible to get permits to transport this. They are hostile to the industry because they want everyone driving electric cars and riding buses. And as long as people like that are in charge, we're going to have this problem. This is a supply problem, and the administration's gimmicks are not going to solve that.
All right, Senator Marco Rubio of Florida joining us live. Senator, thank you so much for coming on National Report. We do appreciate your time.
Thank you.